The whip cut the air with a sound like a gunshot. But the woman tied to the post in the center of the dusty square didn't scream. Not yet. Her name was Anna, and her people, the Apache, were gathered to watch her pay for breaking a sacred law. Fire seared her back, a line of pure agony, but she bit down on her lip, tasting blood. She would not give them the satisfaction. Another crack. Another line of fire. The crowd murmured, some with pity, most with a cold, hard righteousness. She had shamed them. She had chosen to love an outsider, and for that there was a price. The elder, his face a mask of grim duty, raised the whip for a third strike. The sun beat down. The air was thick with hate. Anna closed her eyes, bracing for the impact, but it never came. Instead, a shadow fell over her. A man's voice, low and hard as iron, cut through the tense silence. Enough. The elder froze, whip held high. The crowd stirred, turning to see who dared interfere. A tall cowboy had pushed his way to the front. His hat was pulled low, casting his face in shadow, but there was no mistaking the authority in his stance. His name was Jack Callaghan, and he was a man who traded in silence and solitude. But not today. "This is our law, cowboy," the elder snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "You have no right here." Jack didn't even look at him. His boots crunched in the dirt as he walked forward, slow and deliberate, until he stood right between Anna and the whip. He was a human shield, a wall of flesh and bone, daring the world to try him. He spread his arms just a little, a gesture that was both a challenge and a promise. "I don't care about your law," Jack said, his voice flat and cold as a river stone. "This isn't justice. It's cruelty." The elder spat on the ground. "She shamed us. She betrayed our ways. She must pay." Jack's jaw tightened. He still hadn't raised his voice. He didn't need to. The danger coming off him was a physical thing, a pressure in the air. He turned his head just enough for Anna to see his eyes. They weren't cold now. They were filled with a strange, fierce kindness she hadn't seen in a lifetime. In a voice so low only she could hear, he whispered, "You're safe now." A single tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek. Not a tear of pain. It was a tear of hope, a feeling so foreign it burned more than the whip. The standoff stretched into a long, suffocating silence. The entire town of Copper Ridge held its breath. Finally, Jack's hand moved. Not fast, not with aggression, but with a chilling certainty. It dropped to the worn leather holster at his hip. His fingers didn't even touch the handle of his Colt, but the message was clear. "If you want to keep whipping her," he said, his voice level and even, "you'll have to go through me." No one in that crowd wanted to test Jack Callaghan. They'd seen him in town for supplies. They knew the stories. They knew about his steady hand and his even steadier gaze. The elder's face contorted with rage, but he saw the truth in Jack's eyes. This was not a bluff. This was a line drawn in the sand. After a lifetime of seconds, the elder's arm dropped. The whip fell to the dirt like a dead snake. He turned, his shoulders stiff with defeat and fury, and stalked away. The crowd, their spectacle ruined, began to melt away, scattering like shadows at noon. Jack knelt beside Anna. His hands were surprisingly gentle as he worked at the knots binding her wrists. The ropes fell away, revealing raw, bleeding skin. Without a word, he shrugged off his own dusty coat and draped it over her shoulders, hiding the bloody marks on her back from the world. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice soft again. She could only nod, her legs shaking too much to hold her. He slipped a strong arm around her waist, taking her weight as if it were nothing. He held her steady, shielding her from the few remaining stares, and led her away from the square of her shame. They walked until the town was a smudge on the horizon, and the only sound was the wind whispering through the sagebrush. The desert stretched out before them, vast and unforgiving, but for the first time in months, Anna felt like she could breathe. Finally, her own voice returned, cracked and hoarse. "Why? Why would you risk your life for me?" Jack didn't stop walking. He just glanced at her, and in his eyes she saw a history of pain that mirrored her own. "Because no one did that for my wife," he said, the words quiet but heavy as lead. "And I'll never stand by and watch it happen again." Her breath caught in her throat. There was a story there, a wound that had never healed. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. She just walked beside him, each step taking her further from one nightmare and deeper into a mystery she couldn't possibly comprehend. She was safe, for now. But safety in this land was a currency paid for in blood, and she had a feeling the bill was about to come due. The days at Jack Callaghan's ranch bled into one another. It was a simple place, a small cabin and a corral miles from anywhere, baked by the sun and scoured by the wind. It was a fortress of solitude. Anna's back began to heal, the raw stripes turning into dark scars, but the wounds inside were deeper. Every creak of a floorboard, every snap of a twig outside, sent a jolt of fear through her. Jack was a ghost in his own home. He moved with a quiet purpose, tending to his horses, mending fences, and nursing the small fire in the hearth so she would never wake up in the cold and dark. He never pushed her to talk, never asked what she had done or why her people had turned on her. He just gave her space. He gave her silence. He gave her safety. And in that silence, something fragile and unexpected began to grow. Trust. One evening, the setting sun painted the desert in hues of blood and fire. Anna sat by the hearth, stitching a patch onto a piece of canvas, while Jack cleaned his revolver at the small wooden table. The rhythmic click and slide of metal was the only sound. She finally broke the silence, her voice barely a whisper. "They called me a traitor." Jack's hands stilled. He kept his eyes on the gun. "I loved a man who was not of my blood," she continued, the words coming in a rush now, as if a dam had broken. "His name was Liam. He was kind. He saw me, not just an Apache woman. He saw me." She paused, her knuckles white as she gripped the canvas. "He died trying to protect me. And still they blamed me. They said I brought this trouble upon us. They said I had to pay." Jack laid the pieces of his revolver down on the oilcloth with surgical precision. He looked up, and his eyes met hers across the room. "Then they weren't worth your loyalty," he said, his voice soft but firm. She looked at him then, truly looked at him, and saw past the stoic cowboy. His face was a roadmap of loss. His eyes carried a weight she recognized because she carried it too. They were two people from different worlds, scarred by the same cruelty, now bound together by an unexpected kindness. That night, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Anna slept without waking from nightmares. But peace is a fleeting visitor in the desert. The next morning, it was shattered by the distant thunder of hoofbeats. Jack was on his feet in an instant, his gun belt already strapped to his waist. He moved to the window, peering out at the horizon. A group of riders, maybe 5 or 6, were approaching fast. Their silhouettes were sharp against the rising sun. "Stay inside," he ordered, his voice all business. He stepped out onto the porch, his rifle now in his hands, and waited. Anna watched from the crack in the door, her heart pounding against her ribs. They weren't from her tribe. These were white men, armed and grim-faced, and they were led by a man wearing a tarnished silver star, Sheriff Brody of Copper Ridge. "Callaghan!" Brody yelled as they reined in their horses, kicking up a cloud of dust. "We know she's in there! Send out the Apache woman!" Jack didn't move a muscle. "She's under my protection, Brody. Ride on." The sheriff smirked, a cruel twist of his lips. "Protection? That's a funny word for it. The Apache elder, Cale, filed a complaint. Says you abducted her. Interfered with tribal justice. That gives me all the authority I need." It was a lie. Anna knew it instantly. Cale would never go to the white man's law. He hated them. This wasn't about tribal justice. This was about something else entirely. "She's not going anywhere," Jack repeated, his voice dangerously low. Brody's smirk vanished. "Don't be a fool, Callaghan. She's not worth dying for. What is she to you, anyway?" Before Jack could answer, Anna pushed the door open and stepped out onto the porch beside him. She stood tall, the morning sun hitting her face, her eyes burning with a defiance that surprised even herself. She wouldn't hide while he fought her battles. Not anymore. "I am not a thing to be handed over," she said, her voice clear and strong. Brody's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something that looked like recognition or maybe fear. He quickly masked it. "See? She's fine. Now come along quietly, girl. We'll get this all sorted out." Jack shifted his stance, bringing the rifle up slightly. "You heard her. Now get off my land." Brody stared at Jack, then at Anna, and a slow, ugly realization seemed to dawn on his face. He wasn't just here for her. He was here to see if she'd talked. His eyes darted between them, calculating. Then he laughed, a short barking sound. "Have it your way, Callaghan, but you just made a powerful enemy. You and your little pet. You should have stayed out of it." He looked directly at Anna, his voice dropping to a near whisper that still carried on the morning air. "Just like Liam should have." The name hit Anna like a physical blow. Her blood ran cold. How did Sheriff Brody know Liam's name? The riders wheeled their horses around and galloped away, leaving a thick silence in their wake. Jack watched them go, his knuckles white on the stock of his rifle. He finally turned to Anna, his expression unreadable. He had heard it too. "Who was Liam?" he asked, his voice quiet. "And what did he have to do with the sheriff of Copper Ridge?" The fragile trust between them suddenly felt like a chasm. He had saved her from her people. But they had just discovered they were trapped in a much deadlier game, with players and rules they didn't understand. And Anna was beginning to suspect that the man she loved hadn't just died protecting her. He had been silenced. The sheriff's words hung in the air long after the dust from his horses had settled. Just like Liam should have. It wasn't a threat. It was a confession. Anna stumbled back, gripping the porch rail for support. He was a prospector," she whispered, her mind racing. "Liam was looking for silver in the hills. He was good, honest. He traded fairly with my people." Jack watched her, his gaze sharp and probing. And he found something," she said, her voice trembling. "He didn't tell me what it was. He said it was dangerous. He said people would kill for it. He found a cave, high in the Dragoon Mountains. The day he died, he told me he was going to Copper Ridge to file a claim. He was going to talk to Sheriff Brody." Jack's face hardened into a granite mask. "He never made it." "No," she choked out. "A group of men ambushed us on the trail. They weren't Apache. They were white men. They shot him. I ran. I ran back to my camp. But when I told the elder Cale what happened, he didn't believe me. He said I was lying to cover my shame. He said Liam's death was a punishment from the spirits for breaking our laws." The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture that was darker and uglier than Jack could have imagined. This was never about tribal law. It was a cover-up. Cale was either a fool or a pawn, and Sheriff Brody was at the center of it all. "He wasn't just a prospector, was he?" Jack said, his voice quiet but intense. "What did he give you, Anna?" Her eyes widened. She clutched the collar of her dress, her hand instinctively going to a small leather pouch she wore on a cord around her neck, hidden beneath her clothes. She had kept it secret, even from Jack. It was the last thing Liam had given her. He saw the movement. "Show me." Hesitantly, she pulled the pouch from under her dress. Her fingers still trembling, fumbled with the drawstring. She emptied its contents into her palm. It wasn't a rock or a nugget of silver. It was a small, folded piece of oilskin, a map, and tucked inside it was a single, tarnished, brass button from a cavalry uniform. Jack took the map, his touch gentle. He unfolded it carefully. It was crudely drawn, showing a series of landmarks leading to a cave marked with an X. But it was the writing scrawled at the bottom that made his blood run cold. It was a list of names: Sheriff Brody, Mayor Thompson, Judge Miller, and one more. A name that hit Jack like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. A name from a past he had buried years ago under a mountain of grief and whiskey. Elias Vance, the man who had led the raid on the town where Jack's family lived. The man who had personally murdered his wife and son. The man Jack had been hunting for years before giving up and retreating into his desolate ranch, convinced Vance had vanished forever. He wasn't gone. He was here. And he was connected to Sheriff Brody and whatever secret Liam had stumbled upon. "This isn't about Silver," Jack said, his voice a raw, ragged whisper. "This is about them." He looked at Anna, and for the first time, she saw the full, terrifying depth of the storm behind his eyes. The quiet, protective cowboy was gone. In his place was a hunter who had just picked up a cold trail. "What is it?" she asked, seeing the look on his face. "What does that name mean?" "Elias Vance," Jack said, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "He's the man who killed my family." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Her personal tragedy, her shame, her punishment. It had all been a lie, a distraction, and it was tangled up in the very nightmare that had created the broken man standing in front of her. They weren't just two strangers brought together by chance. They were two victims of the same monster. A sudden, chilling thought struck her. Her people hadn't punished her just to uphold a law. Cale wasn't just a zealot. Brody had gotten to him. He was using her tribe's traditions to silence the only witness to Liam's murder. They weren't trying to punish her. They were trying to bury a secret. And now, Jack knew. Which meant Brody and Vance wouldn't just be coming for her anymore. They would be coming for both of them. His ranch wasn't a sanctuary. It was a cage. And the predators were circling. The revelation settled over the small ranch like a shroud. Every shadow seemed longer. Every gust of wind sounded like approaching hoofbeats. They were no longer hiding from Anna's past, but from Jack's. The two pasts were one and the same, a twisted knot of greed and murder. "This map," Jack said, his voice strained, forcing himself back to the present. "It's the only thing that connects them. Liam must have overheard them, found their hideout. He said it wasn't Silver," Anna remembered, her voice faint. "He said it was something wrong. Something that would poison the whole valley." Jack traced the lines on the oilskin. "This isn't a claim map. This is a ledger. A list of conspirators." He looked from the map to the brass button still resting in Anna's palm. He picked it up. It was old, military issue. Vance was ex-cavalry, dishonorably discharged. This was his. The button was the proof. Liam hadn't just found a location. He'd found evidence tying Vance to the scene. And he'd given it to the one person he trusted. "We can't stay here," Anna said, the reality crashing down on her. "They'll come back. They'll come back with more men." "Running won't solve anything," Jack countered, his mind already working, the old instincts of a soldier kicking in. "They'll hunt us to the ends of the earth for this map. There's only one way to end this. We have to use it. We have to expose them." "How?" she cried. "It's us against a sheriff, a mayor, a judge, and him, Vance." "They have power in town," Jack conceded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "But out here, the land is on our side. Liam found their secret. We're going to use it to set a trap." His plan was desperate, a long shot born of rage and necessity. They would use the map to lure Brody and his men out of the safety of their town and into the unforgiving wilderness where Jack was king. But not to the cave Liam had marked. To a different location, a place of Jack's choosing. "There's a place called Diablo's Canyon," Jack explained, his voice low and urgent. "It's a maze of rock and shadow. One way in, one way out. If we can get them in there, we can even the odds. But first, they needed bait." "I'll ride into the next town," Jack said. "Whiskey Creek. I'll make a show of it at the saloon. Talk loud about a map I found, a big score. Word will get back to Brody inside a day. He'll think I'm a greedy fool who doesn't know what he's holding. He'll come for it." "He'll come to kill you," Anna corrected, her heart seizing with fear. "That's the plan," Jack said grimly. "While he's chasing me, you'll take the map, a copy of it, And leave it for Kale, for your elder." Anna recoiled. "Kale? He wanted me whipped. He handed me over to them." "He's a proud man, but I don't think he's a killer," Jack argued. "Brody is using him. Threatening him, maybe. Show him the proof. Show him the names. Show him that the outsider you loved was murdered by the same men who are poisoning his land. Appeal to his honor, not his law. He might be the only ally we have." It was a terrifying gamble. It meant Anna had to go back, to face the very people who had scorned her, and Jack had to ride straight into the lion's den. They would be separated, vulnerable, with nothing but a fragile hope that their enemies would act as predicted, and a potential ally would see the truth. That night, they worked by firelight. Jack cleaned his weapons with a methodical calm that was more frightening than any outburst of anger. Anna, her hand now steady, meticulously copied the map onto a spare piece of leather. Every line she drew was a prayer. Every name she wrote was a curse. As dawn broke, casting long skeletal shadows across the land, they were ready. Jack swung up into his saddle, his rifle holstered beside him. He looked down at Anna, her face pale but resolute in the early morning light. "Be careful," she whispered. He reached down, and for a brief moment his rough hand covered hers. "They started this," he said, his voice like gravel. "I'm going to finish it." He spurred his horse and rode east, towards Whiskey Creek, a lone rider carrying the bait for a deadly trap. Anna watched until he was just a speck, swallowed by the vastness of the desert. Then she turned and faced west, back towards her people, back towards the man who had ordered her punishment. She held the copied map in her hand, its secrets feeling like a lead weight. Jack was riding to face a monster from his past. She was riding to confront one from hers. They were two separate trails leading to the same bloody conclusion, and there was no turning back for either of them. The ride back to her tribe's encampment was the longest journey of Anna's life. Every rock and cactus seemed to watch her, accusingly. She expected to be met with hostility, with stones, with the same cold fury she'd faced in Copper Ridge. But when she rode into the camp, leading her horse, a strange silence fell. People stopped their work and simply stared. There was confusion in their eyes, not just anger. She walked directly to the elder's lodge, the leather map clutched in her hand. Cale emerged, his face a thundercloud. "You dare return?" he boomed, his voice echoing through the quiet camp. "After shaming us? After fleeing with that white man?" "I have returned to show you who has truly shamed us," Anna said, her voice steady, refusing to break. She held out the map. "The man I loved, Liam, was murdered, not by spirits call, by men. The same men who now have you in their pocket." Cale's eyes flashed with anger. "Lies! You speak lies to cover your sin." "Then look at the map," she challenged, stepping closer. "He drew this the day he died. It leads to their hideout, and it lists their names." She pointed to the bottom of the map. "Brody, the sheriff, and this man, Vance. Is this a name you know, Cale? Is he the one who threatens our children if you do not do his bidding?" The blood drained from the elder's face. He snatched the map from her hand, his eyes scanning the names. When he saw Vance, a tremor went through him. It was a direct hit. Anna had guessed right. Brody hadn't persuaded Cale. He had threatened him. Her public punishment wasn't about law. It was an act of submission to a more powerful evil. "They are poisoning the water upstream from our winter grounds," Anna pressed, her voice rising for all to hear. "That is what Liam found. Not silver. Their filth. It is why the children have been sick. It is why the game is sparse. You accused me of bringing a curse. The curse was already here, Cale, wearing a sheriff's badge." A murmur went through the crowd that had gathered. They had all noticed the sickness, the bad water. They had thought it a sign of displeasure from the spirits. Now, a new, more terrifying explanation was presented. Cale looked from the map to Anna, his face a war of pride and dawning horror. He had been so blinded by tradition and fear that he had become a pawn, sacrificing one of his own to protect an enemy who was slowly killing them all. The shame on his face was deeper than any scar a whip could leave. "What have I done?" he whispered, the words meant for himself, but heard by everyone. "It is not too late to undo it," Anna said, her voice softening slightly. "Jack, the man who saved me, he has gone to lead them into a trap, into Diablo's Canyon. He rides to fight for us, for my honor, and for the memory of his own family, murdered by the same man. Vance." Cale looked up, his eyes meeting hers. The fury was gone, replaced by a terrible resolve. He had made a mistake that had cost lives and honor. Now, he had a chance to reclaim it. He turned to his warriors. "Brody has made us his fools," he declared, his voice ringing with renewed strength. "He has used our laws against us while he poisons our land. The white man, Callaghan, rides to fight a battle that is ours. We will not let him fight it alone." A cheer went up through the camp. The doubt and suspicion were washed away by a current of anger and purpose. Warriors ran for their weapons and their horses. They had been manipulated, their traditions twisted into a weapon against them. Now they would fight back. Anna felt a profound sense of relief, but it was short-lived. Cale had seen the truth. But would it be in time? Jack was out there alone, a single lure for a pack of wolves. Meanwhile, in the town of Whiskey Creek, Jack Callaghan made sure he was seen. He strode into the loudest saloon, ordered the best whiskey, and paid for it with a gold coin that made the bartender's eyes go wide. He let the map, the original, fall out of his pocket onto the bar, snatching it back up as if it were a precious secret. He didn't have to wait long. A greasy-looking man in the corner, a known informant for Brody, watched his every move. Jack started talking, his voice just a little too loud, about a lucky strike, a map to a forgotten Spanish mine in the Dragoons, enough gold to make a man a king. By the time Jack rode out of town an hour later, he knew the message was already on its way to Copper Ridge. The bait was set. He rode hard for Diablo's Canyon, not looking back. He didn't need to. He could feel them coming. He could feel the greed and the violence rolling towards him like a desert storm. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and riding into a trap of his own making. Everything depended on Anna, on a proud elder seeing past his own shame. If they didn't come, he was a dead man. The entrance to Diablo's Canyon was a narrow slit in a towering wall of red rock, barely wide enough for two horses to pass abreast. Jack rode through it, the temperature dropping as the sun was swallowed by the canyon walls. The place was a natural fortress, a labyrinth of twisted passages and high ledges. It was the perfect place for an ambush, or a last stand. He dismounted in a small clearing and waited. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of his own breathing. He checked his revolver, then his rifle. Every sense was on fire. He was no longer a grieving rancher. He was a soldier again, back in the war. An hour passed, then another. Doubt began to creep in, cold and sharp. Had the plan failed? Had Anna been unable to convince Cale? Was he alone out here, a fool waiting for his own execution? Then he heard it, the faint clatter of horseshoes on rock, echoing down the canyon. It wasn't one horse. It was a group, coming fast. Jack melted into the shadows behind a cluster of boulders, his rifle resting on the rock, its sight trained on the canyon entrance. Moments later, they appeared. Sheriff Brody was in the lead, his face set in a greedy sneer. Behind him were four of his deputies, and flanking them, a man Jack would have recognized even in the pits of hell. Elias Vance. He looked older, his face harsher, but the eyes were the same. Cold, dead, merciless. The eyes that had haunted Jack's nightmares for years. A wave of pure, white-hot hatred washed over Jack, so intense it almost made him pull the trigger. He forced himself to stay calm, to breathe. Not yet. They rode into the clearing, their eyes scanning for him. "Callaghan!" Brody shouted, his voice bouncing off the rock walls. "We know you're in here. Came for that map of yours. Hand it over, and we might let you live." Jack remained silent, motionless. Vance laughed, a sound like grinding rocks. "He's not gonna just hand it over, you idiot. He's hiding, like a rat." He dismounted, pulling a rifle from his saddle. Fine by me. I enjoy a good hunt. They fanned out, moving deeper into the clearing, their guns drawn. They were confident, arrogant, 6 of them against 1 man. The odds were in their favor, or so they thought. Jack took a steadying breath, lined up his shot, and aimed for the lead deputy. He wasn't aiming to kill. Not yet. He was aiming to start the conversation. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle shot cracked through the canyon, deafeningly loud. The deputy screamed and dropped his gun, clutching a shattered shoulder as he fell from his horse. Chaos erupted. The horses panicked, rearing and screaming. Brody and his men dove for cover, firing blindly into the rocks. "He's over there!" Vance roared, pointing towards Jack's position. Bullets ricocheted off the boulders around Jack, sending chips of rock flying. He was pinned down. It was exactly as he'd planned. He had their attention. He had them trapped in the center of the killing floor. Now all he needed was his backup. He risked a glance up at the rim of the canyon. Nothing. Just empty blue sky. A cold knot of fear tightened in his stomach. He was alone. The plan had failed. Brody and Vance were organizing their men, directing their fire. They were professionals. It wouldn't take them long to flank him. He was out of time. Jack raised his rifle, preparing to sell his life as dearly as possible. He thought of his wife, his son, and now, of Anna. He had failed them all. And then, a new sound cut through the gunfire. A high, piercing cry from the canyon rim above. A war cry. Brody and Vance looked up, their faces etched with confusion. On the cliffs above them, silhouetted against the sky, were riders. A dozen Apache warriors, bows drawn, rifles aimed, and at their head sat Cale, his face a mask of cold fury. Beside him, holding a rifle with a grim determination that made Jack's heart swell with pride, was Anna. The trap hadn't failed. It had just been sprung. The world exploded. Arrows rained down from the canyon rim, silent and deadly. One of Brody's men went down with a feathered shaft in his throat, gurgling his last breath. The Apache rifles opened up, their shots echoing the crack of Jack's own gun. Another deputy cried out and fell. Brody and Vance were caught in a perfect crossfire, pinned between Jack and the rocks below and the warriors on the cliffs above. Panic replaced their arrogance. They were the ones in the trap now. "It's a setup!" Brody screamed, firing wildly at the cliffs. "They were working together!" Vance didn't waste time shouting. He was a survivor. He grabbed the reins of his horse, trying to mount and flee back the way they came. But Jack was ready. He stepped out from behind the boulder, his revolver in his hand, blocking the only exit. "Going somewhere, Vance?" Jack called out, his voice calm amidst the chaos. Vance froze, his eyes locking with Jack's. The recognition was instant. A flicker of surprise, then a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "Well, I'll be damned. The farmer from Black Creek. I thought I made a widow out of your wife." "You did," Jack said, his voice dangerously soft. "And a grave for my son. I'm here to repay the favor." Vance let go of his horse and raised his rifle. "Should have stayed buried, farmer." The final 2 deputies, seeing the battle was lost, threw down their guns and raised their hands in surrender. Sheriff Brody, his face pale with terror, tried to scramble up the rocks to escape, but an arrow from Cale's bow pinned his leg to the cliffside. He screamed in agony and collapsed. Now it was just Jack and Vance. The canyon fell silent except for Brody's pathetic whimpers. The warriors on the rim held their fire, watching. This was a personal fight. A ghost from the past come to collect a debt. All this, Vance sneered, gesturing around at the carnage, for a patch of worthless land and a mouthy squaw. You could have just walked away. You took everything from me, Jack said, raising his Colt. There was nowhere left to walk. Vance lunged to his right, firing his rifle from the hip. The bullet tore through the sleeve of Jack's shirt, grazing his arm. Jack fired back. His own shot was true. It caught Vance in the chest, spinning him around. Vance staggered, a look of shock on his face. He looked down at the blood spreading across his shirt, then back at Jack. He tried to raise his rifle for one last shot, but his strength failed him. He collapsed into the dust, his dead eyes staring up at the sky he could no longer see. It was over. A profound silence descended upon Diablo's Canyon, heavier than any sound. Jack stood there, the smoke curling from the barrel of his gun, his arm bleeding, his heart pounding. He looked at the body of the man who had haunted his every waking moment for years. He expected to feel triumph, satisfaction, relief. Instead, he just felt empty. The ghosts were avenged, but they were still gone. He heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats and looked up. Anna was riding down the trail from the canyon rim, Kale and his warriors following behind. She slid from her horse and ran to him, her eyes searching his face, checking his wound. "You're hurt," she said, her voice tight with concern. "It's nothing," he said, barely feeling the sting. Kale dismounted and walked over to Sheriff Brody, who was whimpering and clutching his leg. The elder looked down at the corrupt lawman with utter contempt. He pulled the map from his belt, the copy Anna had made, and threw it down on Brody's chest. "Your poison dies with you," Kyle said, his voice like stone. He then turned to Jack. He looked at the dead man at Jack's feet, then met Jack's eyes. There was a deep, quiet understanding that passed between the two men, a respect forged in battle. "You fought for the honor of my people when I was too blind to see the truth. You have our gratitude, Jack Callaghan." He then looked at Anna, and the hardness in his eyes softened. "And you, Anna," he said, his voice thick with remorse. "You are no traitor. You are a warrior. You spoke the truth when no one else would listen. You have saved us. Your place among us is yours again, with honor." Anna looked at her elder, at the warriors who now watched her with respect, and felt a sense of peace she thought was lost forever. She had her people back. But when she turned and looked at Jack, standing alone amidst the wreckage of his past, she knew her path was no longer with them. Her place was here, with him. They took Brody and his surviving men back to Copper Ridge. With the testimony of Kale and the evidence on the map, the whole rotten structure of the town's leadership came crashing down. The truth about the poisoned water, about Liam's murder, about years of corruption, all came to light. Justice, slow and reluctant, began to grind its gears. Days later, Jack and Anna stood on the porch of his small ranch. The desert was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the silence of loneliness and grief, but the silence of peace. His arm was bandaged, and her scars were beginning to fade. "Will you stay?" Anna asked, though she already knew the answer. "With your people?" Jack looked out at the vast open land that had once been his prison. "No," he said quietly. "My past is buried. For the first time in a long time I feel free." He turned to her, a small, genuine smile touching his lips for the first time. This place was just a hideout, but maybe now it could be a home. Anna moved closer, her hand finding his. "My people called me a traitor for loving an outsider," she said softly. "But you are not an outsider to me." He looked into her eyes and saw not a victim, but a survivor, a warrior, a partner. He had stepped into that square to save her from a whipping, but in the end, she had saved him. From his ghosts, from his solitude, from the silence, she had given him a reason to fight again, and now she was giving him a reason to live. Their story wasn't one of easy roads or peaceful days. It was a story forged in violence and betrayal, a story of two broken souls from different worlds who found each other in the dust and blood. They chose to fight back against the darkness, together. Against all odds, they had found their freedom. They had found their justice. And finally, looking out at the endless horizon, they had found their safety. Their journey was just beginning. A new chapter written in the heart of the desert. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, and you want to hear more tales where the forgotten find their voice, and the villains get what they deserve, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss what's coming next.